Senator Hassan and I have worked on trying to solve the government shutdown issue together, and we have a piece of legislation that will probably drop by us at some point for you to be able to take a look at also. But there are multiple issues that you bring to our attention that require a solution, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate that you bring to the attention of all of us. This is something only Congress can do, and this is something the administration can do. That's very helpful to be able to continue to get out. Let me pick up a couple of things. One is keep doing the work you're doing and keep being as blunt as you can possibly be. Every one of your reports, when it goes through any kind of government editing process, everyone's always editing it and trying to make sure the right word is in there and it's not too harsh of a word, not too strong, and make it as blunt as you can possibly make it. And so keep going, keep pushing it back against the forces that say make that more careful, make it clear. So thanks. We appreciate the work you're doing on that. On the debt ceiling, I'd be interested to be able to finish that conversation out that you started with Senator Romney as well. Are you making recommendation for a process? Because obviously this is unique in the world in the way that we do a debt ceiling votes. No one else does it like we do, and probably for a good reason. No one else does it like we do. You have recommendations on that you'd want to present?
Yes. We've highlighted three potential options that the Congress could deal with. One would be to set it within the budget resolution process each year. So when you make appropriation decisions and the revenue decisions, you can say, just like any household would say, here's our expenditures, here's our revenues, here's how much we're going to have to borrow. Okay, we recognize that when we make the decisions on appropriations. I also think that the budget committees need to have a more holistic look at the government. Somebody needs to do it in the Congress. And so that could be done that way. Secondly, another option could be that Congress just authorize Treasury to say, okay, when you need more money to borrow against, you can notify us and we'll disapprove it. So they can move forward unless Congress acts to say no. The third option would be to just authorize Treasury to borrow whatever sums are necessary in order to execute decisions and laws that the Congress has passed and the President signed into law. Now, up until 1917, Congress approved every borrowing in the federal government, but it just got to be after World War I and then World War II, and the government got bigger. It was not practical. So we arrived at this solution. And so it was really a mechanical solution, and it's separate from the decisions that Congress makes on the budget and the allocation. Part of the problem is, 2/3 of the federal government's budget's on automatic pilot and doesn't even go through the appropriation process. So there's no real look. Now, one recommendation we haven't formally made, except orally, is another improvement, I think, would be for Congress to agree on what the debt to GDP ratio should really be. I mean, what are we really willing to tolerate right now? It just sort of is what it is.
It is.
And we don't plan or manage on a budget standpoint. And there are many things that aren't accounted for in the budget process. Major disasters, for example. A lot of our fiscal exposures aren't accounted for in the budget. These estimates I was talking to Senator Romney about earlier aren't even considering if we have a recession, there's another war, there's all these other major catastrophes and disasters. And so, but Congress doesn't have a game plan.
Last year I was on the Budget Reform Committee. That was an ad hoc committee, 8 Democrats, 8 Republicans, trying to be able to find a solution to how we fix the budgeting process. Obviously, debt ceiling was a major portion of that. It was very unfortunate that after a year's worth of work that failed at the end, and it was really a trust issue is the reason that failed at the end in December. I've talked to the Budget Committee about reviving some of those same issues. Senator Enzi is very committed to that. Senator Whitehouse, there are several others that are very committed to getting that done. So I'm hopeful that we can address that. But one of the things that came out of it was our blunt conversations with CBO, when they said, if you want to keep debt to GDP at 78%, where it is right now, it doesn't get worse, and it's already bad. Obviously, $22 trillion in debt is bad. 78% debt to GDP is bad. If you want to just keep it at bad, you have to either increase taxes or decrease spending by $400 billion a year every single year for the next 30 years. I think most of our colleagues don't realize that we've already tipped over Is there a tipping point? We're over the tipping point. We're on the other side of it now. There is no will in Congress to raise taxes or decrease spending by $400 billion a year this year, much less every single year for the next 30 years, just to be able to keep status quo where we are debt to GDP. And so I appreciate you raising this. Debt ceiling is a portion of the conversation. It used to be a useful tool. Now it's a destabilizing tool that's there in the arsenal and will continue to be an issue for us. I want to bounce a couple of issues, and Senator Peters has some additional questions, and I'll probably have some additional as well. You raised the issue of tribal issues on your high-risk list for both the federal government's engagement with tribes and tribal members. I'd like to be able to finish that conversation as well. There is some progress in areas I'm grateful to be able to see, but I saw none of them as being met at this point.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, there's been some progress, and we got some immediate attention right after we put it on the high-risk list in 2017 with the update at that point in time. But there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in that area, and we need to see some consistent leadership. We put on the healthcare area, the education area, and then allowing them to use energy resources on their lands. So we've seen improvements in each of the areas, but they're not at the Met level yet.
Have you looked at the coordination agency to agency? Because if you look at tribal connections and responsibilities, obviously it's not just BIA, BIE. It's every agency has a tribal component to it as well on how they're actually working together for a strategic focus.
Yeah, this is Mr. Mark Gaffigan. He's head of our Natural Resources and Environment team who handles our coordination, GAO, for Indian issues.
Okay.
Yeah, Senator, I think you're absolutely right. The coordination issue is key. In December 2018, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights issued its most recent report on our commitment to tribal nations, and we're not meeting our commitment, and it's through a lot of areas across government. And even within GAO, we're talking about doing a more coordinated effort to look at these issues across government to ensure that we're doing a coordinated look at the audit and that the different agencies that are involved, whether it's education, healthcare, broadband on tribal lands, economic development, sustainable communities, environmental, it's all government all across the scheme of things, and we're definitely going to be looking at that.
Okay, that would be very helpful because even in areas like criminal justice, BIA will say, well, that's not really us. This DOJ has got that, and they've got that in that certain wing, but it doesn't coordinate actually with BIA, and the requests may have 4 different forms from 4 different entities to be able to do one thing, and no one really knows who's got the ball. And if in government, as we know, if everyone has the ball, no one has the ball. And it's become a really big issue in our tribal areas.
Absolutely, Senator.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Senator Peters and I have worked a lot together on federal rural property, as you know, because we poked you on that several times. We've passed some different pieces on it, on leasing properties. I want to just open up one thing on it, and that is when I was chairing the FSGG Appropriations Committee was the first time I got into the financing and saw the Department of Transportation building that we had leased for 15 years for $700 million. And at the end of our 15-year lease, had the opportunity to buy it for $700 million.
Yeah.
We can never do that again. Yeah. We've got to figure out how to do this. And one of the big questions we've had is how we can work out a lease-to-own type process with the discounted purchase at the end. You've made some recommendations and ideas on that. We've got to figure out how to be able to manage it better. We lease buildings that we're going to have temporary. We're probably going to have a Department of Transportation long-term. That seems like an office we should probably own. We'll probably do that more than 15 years.
We'll go out on a limb.
I'm just reaching out into the future and just guessing that.
Yeah.
Help us with this issue of what you have seen on the lease to discount purchase type structure.
Yeah. Well, first, the team gave me a note that GSA plans to buy the DOT building this year.
Yeah, we put that intentionally into the appropriations bill. That was in my committee that I said, no, we cannot do this. So you are correct. We are purchasing that building and not going to continue leasing a building we should have owned a long time ago.
Yeah, there are three different areas that we focused on. One is to try to get GSA to focus on these high-value leases, that it makes sense to look at whether you should purchase it or not. So they've agreed to do that finally. It took several years. And so they're going to at least look at one this year. But they need a plan, and I think Congress needs to push them to go a little faster in that area. So at least they've agreed to do it. They have a plan to do it. So we'll see. They have a target of trying to save, a certain amount of money in doing that, which is an improvement. They've also thought about having a capital, or made a proposal for a capital fund to set up to be capitalized to allow them to have some money to operate on that the agencies would pay back. That needs congressional authority. They've not yet developed a legislative proposal to present to the Congress, so that's another area. A third recommendation that we've had is, even when you're going to lease and it makes sense to lease, and there's some improvements that need to be done to the property before you're ready to occupy it, right now, that gets funded through the lessor, and then the government ends up paying interest costs on that. So our recommendation is to have GSA loan the money to the agency, to the Federal Building Fund, unless, there wouldn't be any interest costs necessarily, but it would save the government a lot of money to be able to do that. So those are the three recommendations that we've had.
All right, that's very helpful. Senator Peters.